Okay. So welcome to Celtic Fae mythology class number 2. I would love if everybody could let me know if you attended class number 1 or if you watched class number 1 on YouTube or if this is your first class. And you can let me know by just telling me or you can post it in the chat.
I watched the first one on YouTube and I'm so excited for this. I love mythology.
Awesome. Yay. Okay. Cool. So it looks like I think you are the only person who watched class number 1. That's totally okay, by the way. If you didn't watch class number 1, don't worry about it. You should watch it. You should go back and watch it, but you don't need to watch it before this class. And if you feel like you're lost or behind because we are covering things that are more advanced, please feel free to ask all of the questions. Awesome. So I want to let everybody know that for the first 4 classes, we will be using one of my favorite beginner's books for Celtic Fae, which is called A Beginner's Guide, Fairies and Nature Spirits by Teresa Moorey. And that is linked and listed in our bibliography section for those of you who would like to get the book. I did notice something that a couple of the students had told me who were trying to get this book. Apparently, this book is really hard to find. I got it probably when I was like 11 years old, and I got really, really into the Celtic Fae and wanted to learn more about them. And this book was recommended by one of the people that I was learning about magic from. And I got it when I was really young, and apparently it's kind of hard to find now. Oh, good. I'm so glad you found it on Amazon. Last time I was looking with a student and I was like, oh, I bet it's on Amazon. And they were sold out and we couldn't find it anywhere. We couldn't even find it at like a used bookstore or at any bookstore or on Amazon. So good. I'm glad. I'm so glad you found it. Awesome. So what I love about this book by Teresa Moorey and what we're going to go over today and talk about is we're going to go more in depth into the different types of Celtic Fae. As we talked about last time, we went over the mythology of the Banshee, which for any of you who know about the mythology of the Banshee, it is very, very cool. And we also went over the elemental fae, which go by many different names. And we talked about the different forms of elemental fae and how they're seen as another word for that might be nature spirits. But the ones that are, or guardians, the ones that are guardians of earth, air, fire, and water. You have fire spirits and water spirits. Sometimes they go by the name of sprites. So you have water sprites and fire sprites, and just the different names and different categories that over the years, whether it be modern or ancient history, and the different categories that they have put them into. And so we're going to dive a little bit more into the different categories of the different fae and which ones are associated with which element and why that matters. So, first of all, has anybody done any research on Celtic mythology and its relation to elementals or nature spirits? And I would love to hear if you would like to share. Oh, yes, the name of the book is called A Beginner's Guide, Fairies and Nature Spirits by Teresa Moorey. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Kate, for posting that. Yep. So yes. Um, does anybody have any knowledge about Celtic nature spirits? Remember that the word nature spirit, because number one, it is a very modern and common English word, has been used to describe many different forms of spirits from all over the world, from many different cultures. There are nature spirits from almost every country throughout time, and they have gone by many, many, many different names. But specifically in Celtic mythology, when we are talking about Celtic Fae mythology, they have a very specific definition for elementals and nature spirits. And does anybody have any knowledge or would like to share? Okay. That is totally cool. So, nature spirits throughout Celtic mythology have been seen as fae that are guardians of that element. Do I have proof that they are real? That is a fantastic question. um, yes and no. Proof is a large word. So, no. Scientifically, no. I don't have pictures and I don't have scientific evidence. And I couldn't repeat an experiment that proved that the Fae are real. No. But I do believe in the Celtic Fae, and I think that it is, and in my mind, I have seen them many, many times before. And I saw them when I was a little kid, and I continue to see them now. And I definitely think that when it comes to mythology, there are little bits and pieces that come from people trying to explain things that they don't understand, um, as well as people seeing things that they don't understand and trying to give a name and a label to it. And as well as when we think about ancient mythology, mythology such as the Celtic Fae, and how old this mythology is, and what they saw when they looked out at the earth was something very different than what you and me might see in modern times. And if you think about the earth existing with no light pollution and what the Milky Way must have looked like when you looked up at the sky, and what a forest must have looked like before we cut down so many trees, and what plains and meadows and hills must have looked like before modern history, before um, modern technology, before a lot of modern science. Um, it I can see, even if it's not real, I can see where people would have gotten these stories and this mythology from, whether or not you believe it's real or not. Um, when you think about the time period, it is much easier to see how you could see fairies, because of what they were looking at. Exactly, and that's, as a couple people said. even if I did have tangible proof to show you, there's never going to be like something that couldn't be disputed or debated. We have pictures of a lot of different mythical creatures. And, you know, those pictures can always be debated. Those pictures can always be scientifically disputed. Is there such a thing as a Fae dragon? That's a very interesting question. There are such things as Celtic dragons that live on the same plane as the Fae, that live in the same realm as the Fae. So they're kind of like dragon Fae. Also, I believe that anything is possible. So if there is such a thing as fairies, then yeah, sure, there's probably such a thing as a Fae dragon too. Yeah, totally. But as far as the mythology goes, and like the actual mythology that we're talking about based on culture and based on the cultural mythology that is part of their spirituality, no. But there are dragons that exist in the Fae realm. Awesome. I love dragons too. We have courses on dragons as well, by the way. So we are going to talk about something that I talk about in every class. And if you've ever had a class with me, you are about to have some serious review. First of all, yeah, so we do have classes on dragons. I'm sorry. I'm trying to pay attention to the chat and talk at the same time. So sorry. Multitasking can be hard. Anyway, so does anybody know about the four elements and what they represent in Celtic mythology? And by the way, if you've ever studied Middle Eastern mythology, ancient Arabian mythology, ancient Persian mythology, it is the exact same symbolism used for the four elements. The reason for that is that Europe and the Middle East have been trading with each other for thousands of years. You will notice that the spiritualities of both of these cultures also got very intertwined. And when we look at the mythology that was written down, it was written down in a time period where they were trading with the Middle East. And the symbology of the four elements, as well as the mythology surrounding the guardians that protected those four elements, are almost identical to each other, which I always found extremely interesting. Because if you look at Middle Eastern mythology and Middle Eastern spirituality, it is definitely not identical to European paganism and Celtic paganism. Those two things are not identical. But what you will find is that their symbology and ideologies surrounding the four elements and the guardians of the four elements are nearly identical, which I always found extremely interesting. And that is because they traded with each other and they talked to each other so much that these ideologies, once they got written down, because I'm sure, obviously, when we talk about the indigenous people of Ireland, of England, of Scotland, of places throughout the UK, it's not going to be identical to the indigenous spiritualities of the people who lived in Iran and Afghanistan and Turkey and Syria and Lebanon. But once everybody was writing things down, it was after they had already started trading with each other. And you will find that, yeah, the ideology for the elements is almost identical. So we are going to talk a little bit about the ideology of the elements and how they relate to the nature spirits of the Celtic Fae. So I have to go to a different study guide for this. It's It's written down in quite a few of the study guides. Let's go to this one. The elements. So we have earth, air, fire, and water. And a lot of different places across the world do not recognize earth, air, fire, and water as being the only elements. That is another thing that is unique and special to both the Middle East and Celtic mythology. A lot of other places throughout Europe, including Norse mythology and Norse paganism, also have a lot of other elements that were added in. It is earth, air, fire, and water. And also there was iron that was added in. There is also spirit that was added in. There's also many different elements that have been added in throughout Europe and throughout most of the world. But earth, air, fire, and water, when we talk about ancient mythology, were considered the four elements of the nature spirits and the nature fae. And the fae protected these elements, and they would do anything to protect these elements. And the nature spirits are where you get some of the stories that you might hear about the fae in ancient times and still today doing things that might not be so nice to other humans, whether that be capturing people in the forest and they never find their way out of the forest, or taking people to the realm of the fae, or stealing people's personalities, all the different stories that you hear. Some of them are actual ancient Celtic fae mythology. Some of them are just fun modern fairy tales that we've kind of made up. But you could also argue that a lot of mythology started out as fun fairy tales that we made up. Some mythology stems from people's actual encounters, which we're going to talk about that too. But anyway, so the symbology behind Earth in Celtic practices is a representation of stability, healing, grounding, worldly things. And when I say worldly things, I mean literally anything that exists on the planet Earth. So that is going to be your house, your clothes, the trees, the flowers, the plants, the animals, all of it. Everything that exists on the planet Earth is represented by the element of Earth. Dirt, soil, life, sentient life, sentiment, goals, career, growth, roots, and connection. Also, when we talk about worldly things, that's also going to include any form of currency. And when we talk about ancient times, this form of currency would have been things like trade. And it also could have been things such as metals and gold, and different forms of currency. The earth is the symbol of the trees around us and within us. The flowers blooming inside of every organism and the ones that grow all around us. When we talk about flowers blooming inside of things, that's a very pagan metaphor. We're not going to go too into it right now, but we do in other classes. Earth is part of the web that connects all living things. It is the food that sustains us and the cycle of life that we are inevitably a part of. It is what grounds us and reminds us of our immortality. It is life, death, and rebirth. As above, so below. From the earth we came, and to the earth we shall return. And that is the, in a nutshell, symbology behind the element of earth. So in Fae mythology, nature spirits and elementals, those are the same things. It just depends on what region you are looking at and what culture you're looking at. You have nature spirits, you have elementals, you have nature fae, you have elemental fae, and they're all talking about the same thing, and they are the guardians of these elements. So if you're talking about a fae that is the guardian of earth, a lot of people just chalk that up to be, the guardian of the trees, the guardian of the flowers. That is not the case. The elemental fae are the guardians of all things that are represented by the symbology and ideology of Earth. So these elementals are going to be the guardians and the people that are the fae that you would give offerings to and that you would feast with and celebrate with and give time and affection and love to if you are trying to give good luck or prosperity to any of the things that Earth represents. So if you are looking to have a really good harvest, if you are looking to protect the forest, if you are looking to protect the animals and plants and trees, then of course you would give offerings to the earth elementals, the earth fae. But also, if let's say you are looking for a bit of luck when it comes to trading or to money or to wealth or to getting a house or to any of the other things that earth represents, you would also give offerings to the elementals, the or to the elementals that represent earth. If you are trying to protect your physical body, if so, a lot of warriors, when they would go off to war or to do all the things that warriors did, then you would give offerings and speak to the earth elementals and the earth fae. And because, like I said, earth as a symbol, as an ideology, represents all things that are physical on this planet. So that includes you and your physical health. That includes your physical body. And so if you're trying to protect your physical body or your animals or your pets, then you would ask for help from the earth elementals and the earth fae. Okay, now I'm going to go back to the chat because I bet looks like we have a lot of questions. So the elementals, the elements represent nature in a sense. The elements represent the four elements, and we're about to go through what each of those four elements represents. Not all of them represent things in nature. Like I said, earth, yes, it represents everything that exists on the planet Earth, but that can also be like your house and your car. And we don't necessarily consider those things to be nature, you know? Like, yes, your house and your car were both made out of things that you get from nature, in a sense, but we don't usually consider those things to be nature. But yes, air, water, earth, fire, and spirit, question mark. We will go over spirit. I'm not going to answer that question quite yet. that's a whole thing. But in short, earth, air, fire, water, and then spirit is represented by a deity or anything that exists in a different realm, such as the dragon, such as the jinn, such as the fae as well, can be represented by spirit. But when we're talking about elementals, like we are right now, we're talking about elementals, nature sprites, nature fae. Those ones are going to be seen much more as being represented by the four elements rather than being represented by spirit. But a lot of other fae, such as the banshee, would probably be represented by spirit. And anything that exists on a different realm, in a different dimension, on a different plane, those things are going to be represented by spirit. But we'll go more into that. Biologically, how do fae look? Do they look like large fairies? So every single fae looks different. And there are many different ideas of what the fae look like. So when we were talking about banshees before, banshees tend to, at least in record and in mythology, tend to be described as women with very with very intense features. They tend to have very long black hair. They tend to scream, and they tend to normally, um, at least in pictures, that's what's kind of hard about the Fae, is that everybody has a very different idea of what they look like. You can't really describe what the Fae look like because every single person who has said that they have seen them has a different idea and a different perception of what the Fae look like. And in mythology, they actually explain that. In the Celtic Fae mythology, they explain that number one, Fae are shapeshifters in some mythology, and they can change the way that they look. In some regions and some cultures, they believe that Fae can shapeshift and can change the way they look. Also, that humans don't see what Fae really look like because all we are seeing is what our eyes will allow us to see. That we can't actually see what Fae actually look like, that instead we are just seeing this image that our brain can comprehend. And that's why our brain tends to see them as little people because that's what our brain can comprehend and understand, or big people. But so that's another theory on why the Fae look the way that they do to us, is that they actually look like completely different beings that our brain can't even comprehend. And so our eyes perceive something that our brain can actually comprehend, and which is a lot of the different ideas that we see in pictures of Fae, which are creatures that have wings that look very much like people. But also, a lot of encounters with Fae, they've looked like animals. Sometimes they've looked more like little alien creatures, like the picture that I used for this class is, if you saw that on the Facebook page, that is one of the depictions of the Fae, where they look a lot more like little amphibious aliens with wings. But they're painted in a different light and perceived in different ways by different cultures all over the region of the UK and throughout different regions of Ireland. And it depends on who you ask and what culture you ask. But we're going to look at some pictures of what people throughout what different groups of Celtic people have described the Fae as in ancient history, and how they've been drawn in the books from like 2,000 years ago, what they were drawn as and what they look like. We are going to look at that. And I remember how today's event would proceed. Maureen, yes, there was. I don't, please be more specific. I'm so sorry. Yes, I explained how today's event was going to proceed. Right now we are talking about the elementals and the nature sprites and their symbology and ideology throughout Celtic mythology. Yeah, exactly. They are typically not Tinkerbell, which is a great way of saying it. Some can be very scary. Some do look like human people. And as I explained, they all look different. We're going to look at some pictures, but yes, some are very scary. Do you think the water fae are angry right now? That's a great question. We're actually getting to that. I'll answer that in a second. And why the fae might be mad. Yes. So in my opinion, yeah, probably. The water spirits and water sprites probably aren't very happy. Probably none of the nature sprites are very happy right now with humans in general. I could see that. But also they live on a different plane of existence as well. So it's there's a lot more to it than just like, I don't know if you've seen the movie Fern Gully, but like Fern Gully painted this idea that the Fae, are the ones that protect the earth and get angry at humans if they treat the earth bad. There is some truth to that, which we are about to talk about literally right now, about the nature spirits. the nature sprites, the nature spirits, the elementals, these are going to be the only fae that probably care necessarily about like what humans are doing to the earth. Most stories that you hear about fae are not these Disney depictions of fairies loving the earth and wanting to preserve it and getting angry at humans for not preserving the earth. Most of the stories aren't like that, but also probably because these stories are, 3,000 years old, and that wasn't probably something that we were worried about back then. It was probably more of like, yeah, the nature sprite might get mad if you poison the drinking water, for sure. But destroying the earth as a whole and like creating global climate change was probably not something that people 3,000 years were thinking about when they were discussing and writing down the mythology. And yeah. Oh, Ferngully. I actually think it might be on Netflix. I'm not sure. Here, I'll type it in the chat. It's a great movie. It's not
I've got a website for that.
Oh, perfect. Awesome.
That'll tell you.
It's not real, by the way. Like, it has nothing to do with like real Celtic fae mythology. But it's a great movie about fairies. It's super awesome. And
It is currently streaming on Stars and Pluto TV if you have those.
Oh, cool. Okay. So you can watch, anybody who has like any of the extra bonuses with Hulu probably has Stars. Anyway, yeah, Ferngully, it's a great movie. But it's also a great example of how we've kind of Disney-fied fairies. So yeah, yeah. Oh, is Pluto free? Oh, cool. There you go. You can watch it on Pluto for free. Oh, cool. Oh, that's awesome, Robin. That would be that would be the exact thing that I could see like an earth elemental fae doing. A wood nymph, which I love that you actually brought that up. A wood nymph is going to be another word from a different culture that they would use to describe an earth elemental fae. So that is wonderful that you brought up that word. That is exactly what we are talking about right now, would be creatures such as wood nymphs, which is another word that people use for an earth elemental fae. Okay, cool. So earth elemental faes, or wood nymphs, or earth sprites, are going to be the protectors and the guardians of the ideology and symbology behind the element of earth. And I just described to you the meaning of the element of earth. Remember, it is not just the trees and the flowers. It is also wealth and prosperity and your personal health and your car and your house and your clothes and your babies and your pets. All of the things that exist on the planet Earth. So now we are moving on to air. So air is not fae that protect the wind. That is, or that hang out in the wind. So air symbolizes freedom, the unknown, things you cannot touch. But most importantly, air represents intellectual thought. It is our wisdom. So the air is wild and untamed, but graceful and ever-changing. Air is the stream that erupts from the ground, the gusts that blow over the ocean, and the light breeze that flows through a meadow. But when we talk about that, those are metaphors for it is all of those things that exist inside you. Because remember, as we said before, Earth is all things that exist on Earth. all things that exist on Earth, such as the trees, the house, the wind, the gases, the all the things. Air does not exist on Earth. I mean, I guess technically it does because you exist on Earth, but air is your wisdom, your knowledge, your thought. It is your anxiety. It is your overthinking and your worry. It is your education, and it is mathematics. It is logic. So when you think about it this way, for any of you who have ever studied anything like sacred geometry, Earth is the flower itself. Air is the sacred geometry and mathematics that make up the symmetry of that flower. Air is knowledge and logic and math. Air is wisdom, education. It is your train of thought, your conscious mind, and how it thinks. And it is also everything else's mind and how they think. It is the brain and mind and education and knowledge and wisdom of a spider. It is the thought and knowledge and wisdom of your dog. It is all thought, all logic, all mathematics. And when I say mathematics, I don't necessarily, I mean, yes, I do mean like the math that you do in your head, but I also mean like the math that makes up the universe. Like I said in that description of the flower, all things on Earth have math involved in them. That's where we got math. So Earth is the physical thing that exists on the planet, whereas air is the logic behind it. It is you thinking about that object. It is you thinking about your health. It is you thinking, it is all your thoughts and everything else's thoughts and everybody's thoughts and everybody's wisdom. Does that make sense? So air is thought, earth is physical things. Air is wisdom, knowledge, all of that. So somebody asked, what is the difference between air and spirit? So spirit, like I said, is deities and dragons and jinn and fae and elves. Spirit is things that exist on a different plane of existence, a different dimension. Your thoughts don't exist on a different dimension. They exist in your brain. And your brain seems like a different dimension sometimes, but it is not. It is just neurons and neuron connections, and neurotransmitters. So air is conscious thought. Spirit is Aphrodite. So that is the difference. Exactly. That is such a great analogy. Yes. Earth is the textbook and air is the intelligence. Exactly. Earth is the textbook and air is the intelligence that you get from the textbook. Great analogy. Thank you. So, air sprites and air nature spirits and different air guardians and fae that are guardians of the air are not these creatures that I feel like movies have kind of ruined when they talk about air spirits. Air is your intelligence. So these are fae that are considered the wisest, and they also are the guardians of the intelligence of the universe. They are the guardians and the storytellers. They are the guardians of thought, the guardians of wisdom, the guardians of intelligence and knowledge and conscious thought. Wow. And conscious thought and mathematics and logic. That is what the air sprites and the air elementals and fae are the guardians of in Celtic mythology. Does that make sense? Any questions? Okay. And then we have fire. Fire, once again, remember, fire sprites and, fire sprites, which are fire fae. Fire elementals are also fire fae. Fire guardians are all fire fae. These are fae that represent the element and ideologies surrounding the element of fire. And physical fire, fire that is literal, the literal fire, can be represented by earth because it is something that physically exists on the planet Earth. You can also use fire to represent the ideologies surrounding fire, but it's much more metaphorical. But anyway, fire is a representation of all the actions that are made by all things that exist on planet Earth. So every action that you have ever made. And passion. So fire is the eruption of passion. It is the element of rebirth and destruction, but it is the process of destruction, the action of destruction. The phoenix that emerges from the ashes with fire bursting from their soul. Fire is rebellion. It is impulse. It is the spark that exists inside of sentient beings. Fire is the warmth and love that consumes us. But when we think about love in a fire essence, it is more like the actions that you make when you are in love. It is not the emotion of love, because we're about to get there. Water is represented by emotions, or emotions are represented by water, but it is the actions that you make when you're in love. It is the actions that you make when you're passionate about something. It is the actions that you make when you're rebelling and when you're being impulsive and when you're excited or when you're angry. But it is the actions that you make when you are making actions. It is all your actions, all the actions that are being made by every single being and every animal and every insect and everything that exists on this planet. Is the actions being made by trees, because trees can make actions too. And the mycelium and mushrooms can all make actions. It is the actions being made by all living things that exist on this planet. It is the energy being produced by all things, because the sun can also make actions in a sense, because it can make energy, which can in a sense be an action. It is divination. It is magic, because magic is the performance of an action, and divination work is the performance of an action. It is communicating with other realms, because that in itself is an action. It is the most raw, pure form of magic. It is the first magic of our ancestors. It is a type of energy that can seemingly be created from nothing, much like the actions that we make every day. And the actions of our heart pumping blood, the actions of all the things. All of the actions are represented by fire. Does that make sense? So the elementals, the fire fae, fire nymphs, fire, all the different words that different cultures have used to describe the Celtic fae that represent the element of fire. They are the guardians of our actions, the guardians of all action happening at all times. And the actions that we make when we are passionate, or when we're performing magic, or when we're excited, or when we're angry, or when we're destroying things. All of that is, those fae are the guardians of those actions, of all actions. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions about that? So, to go back to our analogy, we have the flower. We can just stick with the flower. The flower itself is earth. The sacred geometry that makes up the symmetry of the flower is air. And the process of the flower growing, the action of growing, is fire. Yeah? Make sense? Yeah, that totally does make sense. Yeah. And you can totally relate. By the way, what I'm describing to you right now, for this class, we're going to be using it to talk about the Fae. But what I'm describing to you right now is the ideology and symbology of North African, Middle Eastern, and European elemental work, which also includes things like tropical astrology. So what I'm describing to you now when I talk about fire is also the description of fire signs. Fire signs are usually led by impulse and action and passion and all of the, it goes on. They're very impulsive, so on and so forth. Everything that I'm describing to you now is the base ideology that comes from about 4,000 years ago when North Africa and the Middle East were, I don't know if you want to say discovered, like we're writing down the ideologies of these elements. They were incorporated throughout Europe, and they are the basis of tropical astrology. They are the basis of divination work, of circle casting, when we're talking about European circle casting, and all of that. I am describing to you the base ideology of the elements when it comes to all forms of magic that stemmed from 4,000 years ago in North Africa and the Middle East, when these ideologies were first imagined and first talked about and first came into being. Of course. So, the flower analogy again is that all things earth is represented by the flower, because earth is a representation of all things that exist on the planet. Therefore, the flower exists on the planet in its physical form. The flower is represented by earth. Air represents thought, knowledge, wisdom, mathematics, and logic. So the symmetry of the flower, the sacred geometry and symmetry that make up the flower is air, because it is represented by math, logic, geometry, wisdom. So the symmetry that makes up the flower is air. The physical action of growing is fire, because fire represents action, all actions that we make, or all actions that all things make, that all things on the planet make. So a flower, its action that it makes is growing, and therefore growing is represented by fire. Does that make sense? Awesome. Good. Of course. Cool. So now we are moving on to the next elementals. So the next one, of course, is water. And water is represented by our emotions. Or water represents emotion. So the water sprites, the water fae, the water elementals, they represent emotion. They are the guardians of emotion. So it is the emotional whirlwind that swirls through our heart and soul. Water is the transformation of our bodies and consciousness. It symbolizes the phases that we move through in life, the never-ending circle of life. Water is love, but I mean the actual emotion. When we talked about fire, in it being love, it is the actions that you make when you are in love. Water is the representation of that emotion, the emotion of love, the emotions of sadness and happiness and grief and joy and anger and depression and all of the things. All of the emotions are represented by water. It is trauma, it is loneliness, it is the emotional relationships that we share with others, it is friendship, it is all of the emotions. And this one is a little bit hard because flowers don't tend to have emotions, but maybe they do. So if the flower was sad, it would be represented by water. Or if the flower was very happy, it would be represented by water. And I do think that plants have emotions. So the flower's happiness is represented by water. But yes, water is represented by emotions. So okay. What about astral projection and spirit? If air represents thought. When I passed. That is, okay, hold on. Awesome. Yes, so that is a great question that actually moves us along very, very well in what we're talking about. So, the question was, what about astral projection and spirit if air represents thought? I don't quite understand that question. I work a lot with astral projection. That's not what I don't understand. I teach many classes on astral projection. But I don't quite understand what you're asking. If air represents thought, what about astral projection and spirit? So with astral projection, honestly, you could just, are you, I'm not quite sure what you're asking on that one. Please elaborate. But I want to answer your second question. So your second question is, how would you differentiate between fae and trees as beings themselves? So this is a great question because you wouldn't. And that is exactly what we're talking about right now. So one way to define a nature sprite or a nature fae would be the guardian of that element. So like I talked about before, when we're talking about air, it would be the guardians of thought and intelligence and wisdom, the storytellers and all of that. Also, when we're talking about earth, an earth sprite, an earth fae, could very well be a tree. It totally could. Actually, in many, many cultures, it totally is. So because those would all be earth sprites. So if you're talking about an earth elemental could be a flower. But you also have to remember an earth elemental, which is a fae. So when I say the word earth elemental, I'm talking about a fae. Their fae go by many names. One of those names is elemental or nymph or fae and many, many, many different names, depending on what culture. But an earth fae could be a tree. It in itself. It's not that like a fae is living in the tree. It's that the fae is the tree. The earth fae could be a flower. It could be also a rock. It could also be a river. It could also be like in many cultures, the fae are literally the trees, or they are literally the flowers and the grass and the plants. But those would all be earth elementals. Those would all be earth fae. When we're talking about things like water or air or fire, it gets a little bit more metaphorical because they're not things that actually you can touch that exist. So, for instance, an air elemental or an air fae is not the breeze. It's not the air. It is intelligence and wisdom. A water fae is usually not, a water sprite is usually not the river. Now, that one gets a little tricky because there are some cultures that do believe that water sprites can literally be the river, but not many. Usually, the water sprites will live by the water, but they are representative of emotion, and they are the guardians of emotion, and they are the these sprites and elementals of emotion. They represent emotion. They help other beings and other animals and other fae with emotion. They also can be the source of emotion. Sometimes people will say that when you randomly start crying for absolutely no reason, it was a water sprite that just decided that it was time for you to release and time for you to cry, even though it seems seemingly for no reason. That was a water sprite. And that just helped you to release that, even though it seems like it's for nothing. So yes, I hope that answers your question. Yes, so hold on. Awesome. Okay. So I answered all those, yes. So these do correlate with astrology. Yes. So like I had said, what I am describing to you right now, these are the four elements. The ideologies I'm explaining to you right now, where water represents emotion, fire represents action, air represents intelligence and wisdom and thought and logic and mathematics and all that, and earth represents physical things that exist in their physical form. This is an ideology from about 4,000 years ago that started in North Africa and the Middle East and made its way to Europe, and which is how tropical astrology came to be. And these elements, the ideologies that I'm teaching you right now, the symbology that I'm teaching you right now, is the exact same symbology and ideology used in tropical astrology, also used in European, many forms of European paganism and magic and divination work and circle casting and all of that, because the Middle East and North Africa have been trading for thousands of years. And a lot of this knowledge got passed on and passed down. And by the time it started getting written down, this was the ideology shared between North Africa, the Middle East, many parts of India, and Europe. Awesome. Okay. So, cool. I just want to make sure I got everybody's questions answered. Awesome. So those are the different symbols that elemental fae represent. And so when you were talking about each elemental fae, this is what they will be represented by. And what they kind of rule over, what they help with, what they all, there are so many different stories, but whenever you talk about a water sprite, for example, or a water fae, it's always going to have something to do with emotion, friendship, love, grief, sadness, happiness, joy. And it's also usually going to have, something to do with water. But same with all of the elements that I just named to you. Anytime that we talk about a certain elemental fae that has to do with one of these elements, you will know the symbology that we're talking about and what this fae has to do with and what their symbology is and what their symbology represents. So okay. So now we are going to do something kind of special, which is why I did not have a slideshow for this one. We are going to pick first, I would like you, oh, there's one more question, I'm sorry. Would water? It depends. I would say probably in the context that you're saying, it would probably be water. because water is going to represent the way you feel about the ebbs and flow of life. The literal actual flow of life, if you're talking about like the actual physical actions that are made, could be fire, but I'm pretty sure you're talking more about kind of the way that humans feel about the ebbs and flows of life, or the way that animals and nature kind of feel about the ebbs and flows of life and how those things kind of interact with each other, and that would all be water. Water is going to be the way that we feel about everything, which usually water ends up taking up a lot, because usually we don't solely think using only wisdom and logic. Usually we don't only act using strictly and only impulse and impulsive passion. Usually there's some feeling involved. So usually it's water. Which makes sense, you know, water is the building blocks of life. It is, we usually don't do things without an emotion tied to it. And things don't usually happen without an emotion tied to it. So you're going to pick an element that really speaks to you. As I went through all the elements, which element did you feel the most connection with? Which one really spoke to you while I was describing what they all mean? And you're going to pick one element, and we're going to do a short meditation together where we communicate with the Fae. And the way that we're going to do this, first off, is I'm going to show you some pictures. So we're going to stop sharing really quick. And I'm going to show you some pictures, like I said, we were going to do before, of different ways that the Fae have been depicted. Okay. So like I said, they go by many different names. And here we go. This is the one I was trying to find. Thank you. So this is a very famous one that all people seem to, not all, that's a lie, that many people in many different forms of not only Celtic Fae mythology, but a lot of people from also Scandinavia and also different parts of Switzerland, for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, people say that this is an extremely good drawing for what they saw when they're describing many different forms of water sprites, and they go by different names. This one, it depends. I really like the name Nilkin, and that is the name that was given to this one, but there are many names. So this is the picture. So this is an image of a water sprite. It does. So, what you can definitely, like I said in the beginning, and like we talked about already, a lot of these sometimes can be explained and described by it being a water spider, by it being a beaver's den, by it being a stack of wood. But it also has like glowing eyes. But this is something that not only hundreds and like I think it was thousands. I think there was like a really cool study done a really long time ago where they asked people, because there are many people throughout Scandinavia, throughout Europe, throughout the UK, who still follow the old traditions and who still very much so believe in the Fae. And not only believe, but like the Fae exist, like for sure in their minds. And there are certain places you cannot build, certain places you cannot live, certain places you can't do construction, places you're not allowed to put roads, places you can't cut down trees, because the Fae ruled it. Like the Fae exist there, and you can't disturb or mess with the Fae. And so this is an image of a water sprite or water elemental that has been agreed upon by many people that this is something that they've all seen in the water, whether it be a lake as depicted here or a pond kind of depicted here. But many people have also said they've seen it in the ocean as well. Okay, so that's the water one we're going to look at. We're going to look at the okay. Okay, so then you have, where is it? I had a specific one I wanted to show you, and I forgot to save it. Okay, here we go. So, of course, here we go. Share screens. This is the fire elemental, once again agreed upon by many people from many Celtic traditions. This is fire, and if you can see, to me it looks like a snake coming out of the fire. But to many people it looks like many different things. Now remember, this is one image. There are many images, both drawn and created in many different ways to show off what people have seen and agreed upon by thousands of people that this is something that they have also seen. I'm just showing you one, and there are thousands, and we're going to look at others as well. But anyway, this is the fire. And this is here we go. Come here. This is the air. The fire one, honestly, that is just a fire sprite. That one doesn't have a specific name. It goes by fire sprite. The water one had a name. This one, once again, does not. These ones are just known as the air elementals or the air sprites. They go by many different names, but in Celtic mythology, air sprite and air elemental would be very common. That would be the common usage. But it depends on what culture, what Celtic culture you're looking at. There are, of course, specific dialects and specific languages where it's, of course, going to go by millions of different, well, not millions. It's going to go by lots and lots of different names. But in English and in commonly used English terms, air sprite or air elemental, fire sprite, fire elemental. I like that. A conga line of air fae. I love it. Yes. Oh, yes. Children playing a game. I can see that. I can see both. Yeah. And the more you look, which I really enjoy about this picture, and this is a famously painted picture as well, of, like I said, all of these are hundreds of people who all say they saw the same thing, and this is a very famous painting of it. The more you look at the painting, the more air fae you can see. It's pretty cool. They're everywhere in the painting. Yes, they do. You can, and who knows? Maybe it is all one creature. Like I said, it's the human eye that makes you think that it's a bunch of them. Maybe in the Fae realm, it is one being. Okay. Here, let me tell you the artist. Um, August Malmenstorm. My gosh, hold on, let me copy it for you. I'm so sorry. Here you go. I'm gonna put it in the chat. That is the artist. Okay. And then next, we are going, of course, to look at Earth. And notice how none of these, as I loved how somebody said, none of these look like Tinkerbell. But this is one that I'm sure all of you saw because I posted it. Already. Oh my gosh. Let me try and zoom in here. Here we go. This is the Earth. Hold on. Share screen. Earth. And one of my favorite pictures of the Earth elemental, which is the class or the picture that was used for class today for a reason. It is. The painting is called Dancing Fairies. Yep. Yeah. And remember when we talk about Celtic Fae mythology influenced like most, not all, because definitely when we talk about Scandinavia, the Norse people definitely have a lot of their own and did not take on a lot of the mythology of the Celtic people. But when we talk about Celtic Fae mythology, it spread throughout many parts of Europe. So you're going to get painters, philosophers, authors, and a lot of stuff that we're going to talk about that is going to be from Germany, from Italy, from France, from Spain, from many different parts of Europe. That doesn't mean that it's not Celtic in origin. It is still Celtic in origin. It's just that spirituality tends to not stay in one country or even one region. It tends to spread even just naturally, not because people were converting other people, but because stories spread naturally and mythology spreads naturally and tales and fairy tales and all of this spreads naturally. So a lot of these things, a lot of the painters and a lot of the authors and stuff, and even the poems that we're going to talk about don't all necessarily come from people who specifically only live in Ireland and England and Scotland and Wales. Awesome. Okay. Oh, and by the way, yes. So this one specifically, what I showed you, which I love, the specific earth sprite that I showed you, is a changeling from Ireland. So changelings, it's an earth sprite changeling. So it's an earth sprite that is a changeling. And this one is specifically and only Celtic. So the picture that I used for this class and the picture that I just showed you of the earth sprite is a famous Irish painting and from Ireland, and it is Celtic. And this is from here. Doo-doo-doo. Here, I'm actually just going to link you, or maybe I should post it. Hold on. I'll just link you the article. Which I find funny that, oh, it's okay, here we go. It's actually a really cool article. It's kind of funny that it's like tied to this thing about Irish wedding rings, which is where I happened to find it, because I have seen this picture so many times. And it's a picture that I love and that a bunch of my mentors use to show off changelings, especially because this is a very famous Celtic painting. And it comes from the Tales of Tutha. And I also love Tutha de Danann, and I'm totally pronouncing that wrong. But anyway, the Tutha de Danann stories are stories that I absolutely love, that I've read a million times, and I kept trying to find them online. And I finally found them on like this site for Irish wedding rings, which is very interesting. But anyway, here is where the picture is, and it describes to you the legends and the different stories of the Celtic people and the changelings. Anyway, the reason that we are looking at all those pictures is pick one that you resonate with. So yes, pick one that you resonate with, and we are going to spend a few minutes. I would suggest, I used to be able to on Zoom turn on music, but now for some reason Zoom doesn't allow you to play YouTube videos anymore, which is really sad because I used to turn on really pretty music while we meditated. So I encourage you to turn on some meditation music, and I'm going to pull up the elements again for you. And pick the element that you resonate with. Pick the elemental fae that you resonate with. That's why we looked at pictures, so you can really have a good idea of which one you resonate with most from the pictures and the descriptions of their symbology. And we are going to do a 15-minute meditation. And I suggest that you close your eyes, turn on music that you really like. Actually, we'll make it like 10 minutes so that, I know for some people it's hard to meditate, but I want to see if any messages come to you, because I will tell you why after the meditation, because there's a reason that we're learning about the elementals, and you're going to have homework after this class. Of course, the homework is not mandatory. It is homework that is optional if you would like to. But this meditation is going to go along with the homework. So please pick the picture and element that resonated most with you, just one, obviously, and turn on some music. I'm going to try and see if I can zoom out a little bit so you can kind of see the description. Oh, that's too much. It doesn't look like I'll be able to get many elements on the page. That's so sad. Okay. We only can get earth and air on the page. That didn't work out quite the way I wanted it to. But yes, so turn on the music, close your eyes, think about one of the fae, one of the elementals, whether it be earth, air, fire, or water. Think about the picture that I showed you, and wait and see if a message comes to your mind. And after the 10 minutes is up, I will bring you out of meditation, and we will talk about the messages that came to your mind and why they matter. And they really, really do matter, because there's a lot of mythology attached to these elementals, and how they like to help and aid humans. And we're going to talk about that after the meditation. So the meditation starts now. Pick the elemental that you are tied to and connected with. Turn on music, close your eyes, and connect with your elemental. And we will talk in 10 minutes. Okay. So when you're ready, come out of your meditation. And I would love to hear if anyone got a message or if something unexpected just kind of came to mind while during this while you were meditating. Um, and I would just love to hear about your experience with the meditation. And feel free to take yourself off mute and tell me using your voice if you would like to. Let me know what elemental you picked and what happened during your meditation. You can also just tell me in chat, but I would love if people wanted to talk too. Aww. Thank you so much for sharing. That's beautiful. Oh, I love that. Thank you. Oh, I'm so happy that it went well and that you got so much out of the meditation.
Hi. Oh, go ahead, sir.
I was just saying, I'm not sure many people are going to want to jump up first since this is being recorded. So I'll start. But if you want to, you can.
Sure, why not?
Okay.
Hi, I'm Blythe, and I do have laryngitis. I was one who was having difficulty getting on last night because I live in Western Maryland right now. But I'm a Gemini, and I couldn't just channel or feel one of the elements because I'm a Gemini. I think that's an air sign. But I also do feel the water, the tides of change, and also earth. I love trees. I lived in Colorado for 22 years, so I'm a huge tree hugger. But it just made me think of one of my exes. It was like the love of my life. And it's just what came up. I miss him. I miss the smell of his skin in the morning. I'm like pounding toast. I know that's kind of too emotional, but it's just like sometimes I feel like I want to talk to him in my dreams, and I do. I mean, it's not sad. Every experience I've gone through makes me who I am. That's what I was feeling. Plus, my phone died like right into the meditation. So, anyway, I'm really happy that you guys are here and very supportive. But yeah, it's a lot of pain inside of me. Next.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Hey, it's part of me. Makes me who I am.
No, that's wonderful. And I'm so sorry. I'm so glad that doing this meditation could help you release some of those emotions, though. And it
Yeah.
really seems like you definitely got to meet with, I don't know. I like to think of it.
Wonderful people. Well, not meet, but yeah, be around or online with wonderful people.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
That's so nice that, yeah, you got to connect with those elementals. And so thank you so much for sharing.
Yes. You.
So mine, I don't feel like my connection is as emotional as I'm seeing some others in here. I chose to focus on the air spirits And to me, it felt like the only way to explain it is like a ball of energy was in front of me the whole time, just helping me concentrate on breathing techniques and trying to like teach myself to like calming, an aura of calming around me, and being there, like there's people there for me in spirit and physically, just to help me with my emotions. And that's what I feel like I got out of that, but I don't know.
No, that's awesome. And that sounds super air. And you sound like a very air person too. No, and thank you so much for sharing. I'm glad that you got to connect with the elementals in that way. And definitely the part of meditation where you focus on breathing techniques and focusing on, I don't know, your body and trying to control your air and your airflow and your breathing is a huge part of not only just air literally, but also air symbolically, because you're focusing on a lot of the logistics and the wisdom behind meditation. And so that's beautiful. Thank you.
Let's see, I got the word delightful when I was focusing on the water elementals. I was kicked out of it early because of my cat, but
Cats will do that.
yeah.
No, that's awesome. And delightful is a wonderful, I can see that coming from a water elemental. That sounds so nice. I'm glad that you got a happy meditation too.
Yeah.
It sounds like a lot of people got very emotional meditation.
Water's always been a big thing with me, so I was happy that I got delightful.
Yeah. And I'm
I too never. Oh,
no,
I
go ahead.
too.
Go ahead.
I also picked the air elemental, and as soon as we started the meditation, my cat decided to poop in the litter box and not cover it up, which I ended up cleaning the litter box immediately. And then I also started my essential oil diffuser. But while that was happening, I also started feeling like little, I don't know, like itchy in random places all over my body. And then I recognized my cat was also just like kind of itchy as well. And then I started hearing this voice, but now when I'm trying to think about what it was saying, I can't remember it. So it's like my memory is wiped. And at the time when I was being told this, like whispering in my ear, I was like, oh, I'm totally gonna remember that. It was like almost a cliche thing that they were telling me. So I was like, how could I forget that? So there was a lot of jokester energy going on. And then I looked down and saw a little blue, out of the corner of my eye, it looked like a little blue light on my wrist. So mine was very interesting.
That is so cool. Wow. No, it sounds like, you were like actually visited by an elemental, which is beautiful. That's so cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. That is so neat. And I was just
Hey,
going to say that I was loving all of the things that everybody was saying in the chat too. There's so many to go through, and I'm going through all of them. And thank you so much for sharing these beautiful meditations. But yes, please keep going. Go ahead.
Originally going into it, like I thought like I'd be more connected to the earth, but like when you were talking about like the air and how like it controls like knowledge and wisdom and like anxiety and overthinking, and then seeing the picture of it, like going into the meditation, I was just kind of focusing more on that. And like it started out like kind of more heavy, but more into it, like I could feel like the air around me, and the music that apparently I chose was like straight woodwinds too. And just like had the overwhelming urge to like put my hand on my chest and just kept hearing breathe, it's okay. Just like everything seemed to get lighter and like you could feel the air around me. It was calming in a way. I don't know.
Wow, that's beautiful. And that sounds very much like wisdom from an air elemental. And it's so cool that you were going to go with a different one and that air kind of just came to you. That's beautiful.
If I may, I chose Earth mostly because the little guy is just so cute.
He is.
I think I kind of astral projected. It kind of felt like in the sigil class when we go to different nodes, and I was in front of him, and the little guy took me and showed me like this grotto, and all of the elementals that were shown were there. Like it had in the picture with the air, it had the pond and everything, and the air spirits were flying all around, going around, and there was more of the, I'm not going to remember this right, mokins in the water, not just one, but there was even like little baby ones, and a couple fires going, and like puffs of fire floating through the air, going into fire, and then more coming out, just like they were moving around. But it didn't want me to go in there. So I followed it further to a forest where there were more of the changelings, and we went to its home where it had it kind of pushed me down into a hole, which was where its home was. And I could tell it didn't actually look like a normal house home, but I could see like the couch, kitchen, stuff like that. And it gave me a cookie, which tasted like green tea, but more grassy. I think green tea tastes like grass, but I still drink it. Which is more grassy and kind of good actually. And I've been overwhelmed lately, so I pulled it all that, and it basically told me just to calm down, slow down, let things fall where they may, and in time, everything in my life will be how it's supposed to. I just have to not push it and just let things flow. And right after it finished telling me that, that's when Alex said, "Time's up."
Wow. That is amazing. And you brought up something so cool about the element of earth, as well as that a lot of people encounter being given food. And so that is so cool that you said that, because a lot of people who work with the earth elementals and the changelings and any sprite and spirit that represents earth in the Fae realm talk about how they were given food and drinks. And because food and drinks are a huge representation of earth that we really don't think about enough. And so I think that's so awesome that you brought that up.
Cool. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and I love that you related it to the sigil class. Yep.
Actually, quick question. Is that considered astral projection
Yes,
or a form of it? It is?
it is. Yep.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. That is so cool that you said that. Hold on. Who said that? Kate. Kite? Kite. Oh wait, no. Yeah. That is so cool. Yes, and I love that you found a newfound love for that element. It's an element that I feel like is not talked enough about. So, and exactly like you said, that a lot of people kind of take the air element for granted or don't know what it represents. And a lot of times people just think that it's like the air that we breathe. focusing on your breath, which is a beautiful way, as I said already, to work with air. But realizing how much more it is and how much more it encompasses is beautiful. And I've grown to love air as well. Air is also really hard to work with too, because I feel like, you know, you can definitely feel sometimes when you work with air enough, the overthinking and the anxiety. And as somebody who, I have my master's degree, and who my master's degree is in clinical neuroscience. And after going to school for so long, and I had a really big connection with air, because sitting there trying to read jargon that was way too difficult for me to read, and trying to work with air to gain wisdom and to gain knowledge and education, um, you realize that air, people take it for granted. And air is a much bigger element than we give it credit for. So that's really cool that you brought that up. So thank you. Thank you. Did anybody else want to share? Please share if you would like to. So next I'm going to talk about the homework. So the homework for this class is exactly what you just did. So before the next class, which should be probably in about 2 weeks, because we've got a lot of classes coming up in the next week. So the next class for this will probably be 2 weeks from today, possibly 1 week. I'll post it tonight. Anyway, make sure that you keep an eye on the divination page and just click on events so that you can see when all of our classes are happening. And this class from now on is always going to be on Wednesdays. So just keep an eye out for which Wednesday it's going to be at, and do exactly what you just did, but for longer, if you would like to. And the Celtic Fae, especially the elementals, because as I'm sure a lot of you know who have ever studied Celtic Fae before, a lot of them are not necessarily creatures that you would just want to jump in and go have some fun conversations with. A lot of them are not that. But elementals, the elemental sprites, the elemental fae, are throughout history for thousands of years have been considered creatures that like and enjoy the presence of humans, that enjoy being around humans, that enjoy the offerings from humans. Normally, when you're giving offerings to the Fae, yes, there are hundreds of different types of Fae that you can give offerings to, but the elementals, the sprites, the nature spirits tend to be the ones that probably came and got your offering, and that probably enjoy coming and hanging out with you, that enjoy giving you advice, that enjoy coming and spending time with you. And so doing these types of meditations can lead, which is something that we are going to do in this class, to a form of astral projection, where in the next couple classes, we are going to start astral projecting into the Fae realm, which is much more than just meditating and kind of pretending that you're in the Fae realm. There's a lot more to it than that. And we are going to start learning how to travel into the realm of the Fae, but traveling to go talk to and interact with nature sprites, nature spirits, with elementals, and how to do that safely and how to do that intentionally. And this is a great stepping stone to being able to do that, in just meditating and going and seeing what the elementals have to say to you, focusing on an element, understanding what the element means, because sometimes people go to try to do this and they don't really understand the ideology of the element, and so they don't really know exactly what they're kind of supposed to be focusing on or what they're supposed to be meditating with, and it can kind of lead you to some confusing meditations. And now that you guys understand the ideology, you understand the symbology of the element, it will be much easier to focus your meditation. And so meditate, try 30 minutes. If meditating is hard for you, maybe do it before bed. Try to use your dreams as a way to connect with and communicate with the elemental fae. And we are also next class going to talk a lot more about the mythology. I know this class, we didn't go in as much to mythology. If you watch the first class, it's all mythology. It's the mythology of the banshee, the mythology of a bunch of different kinds of fae, who they are, what they are, and we're going to do a lot more of that. I know this class, we didn't do as much of that. We went into a lot more of the mythology of the elements, the symbology of the elements, but anyway, after this class, go home and meditate for as long as you would like to and see what messages you get from the elemental fae. And yes, you can choose any element you want. You can choose a different element every day or stick with the same one, whatever you would like. And yeah, does anybody have any other questions? And yeah, not only do they enjoy being around humans, they also enjoy helping you. So they might bring you some really wonderful messages. And also, something else that you can do if you would like is give offerings to them. If you find that you're doing these meditations and they're bringing you some incredible wisdom, they're just really fun to hang out with, they're bringing you some really cool meditations, and you're really enjoying hanging out with the elemental fae, give them some offerings. Of course, some of the standard, more generic offerings are going to be giving them things like honeysuckle, things and foods that have honey in them, giving them things like mead, which are kind of very common gifts to give the fae. But let's say you're working with the air elementals. You can give them offerings that represent the element of air. Things to you that represent wisdom, that represent knowledge, that represent thought and conscious mind. Or if you're working with water, like the water elementals, you can give them things that represent water, things that represent emotion, and give them offerings to thank them. And you might get something back as well. Let's see what happens. And I would love when we come back in the next class to hear all of the stories of all the gifts that you got from the Fae, all the things that you gave to the Fae, and how your journey went with the elementals and with the wonderful sprites of the different elements. So, yeah. Does anybody have any questions before we end class for today?
This